Hi there, and welcome to our special Lianghui program, Voices and Votes. I'm Yang Rui. The CPC-led multi-party cooperation and political consultative system, a basic part of China, and a new type of political system will be strengthened. President Xi Jinping emphasized this when attending a joint panel discussion with democratic parties, political advisors, and no-party affiliation delegates. More than 6 decades since the Chinese constitution established the system, how do we understand China's multi-party cooperation and political consultative system in the new era? What can such a system achieve? And how will it influence our life in the coming days? To discuss more about China's party consultation and cooperation system in new era and more, I'm very pleased to have Mr. Victor Gao Zhikai, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization, and Mr. Anna Tangen, Current Affairs Commentator. That's our topic. Before we start, let's take a look at this.
General Secretary Xi Jinping joined panel discussions with representatives from the China Democratic League, the Zhigong Party, the Overseas Chinese Federation, and the people with no party affiliation. 8 CPPCC members shared their insights in the meeting. They discussed the deepening reform, properly handling the work concerning countries that have not established diplomatic ties with China, creating new models for starting up businesses, and facilitating the flow of talent. After listening to their report, Xi Jinping said political consultation and multi-party cooperation led by the Communist Party of China are fundamental to the country's political system. He said the leading role of the Communist Party of China does not mean that democracy is not needed. Instead, it means that democracy needs to be broader and more efficient. And he said multi-party cooperation should stay on the path of socialism with Chinese characteristics.
We talked to General Secretary Xi face-to-face. We think it's a very important way to carry out our duties as CPPCC members. We should well implement this basic political consultation system so as to better hear voices from the democratic parties and people from other sectors of the society.
I believe the best party-to-party bonds shall be a new type, which suits the nation's conditions. To prove it can minimize internal friction, unite everyone's strength, and promote China's effort towards national rejuvenation.
We, the Revolutionary Committee of the Chinese Kuomintang, who were the first to answer the call of the CPC, will never forget why you called, which is to head to the same direction with the CPC all the time.
We share the same objectives with the CPC. Following these objectives, we will conduct a thorough research and investigation and make our advice and suggestions. In fact, a lot of our advice and suggestions have been adopted by the ruling party.
Xi Jinping said China has many challenges to overcome, many actions to be taken, and many problems to be studied thoroughly in the process of building a moderately prosperous society and in the battle against major risks, poverty and environmental pollution. He encouraged the representatives to research these issues and actively carry out their role of criticizing and supervising the implementation of policies.
And I'm afraid that we don't see eye to eye with the Westerners on the idea of democracy in many ways. So what are your thoughts about what's happening here in Beijing in this political season, namely China's multi-party cooperation and political consultative system in the new era?
Well, the problem is a complete misunderstanding of the different systems. I mean, everybody takes democracy to mean what it means in their particular home if they're democratic. They don't see any other option to it. I mean, American exception is based on this idea that American-style democracy in some form or another, plus capitalism is the only way that anybody can go forward, and that this represents the end. But the truth is, people who are watching this need to understand how the system works, and that is, when these party congresses meet, it's not to make new laws and come up with new ideas necessarily. It's really to review all of the work that has been done over many years to plan, to identify problems, identify solutions, create the planning for them, go through the approval levels. So you have the world's largest bureaucracy, which brings forward each year new plans that are necessary to solve existing problems. It's very, very different from the U.S. system, where legislators come up with new ideas to what they think are the problems and try to craft solutions based on that. Much less planning in the U.S. So when you have these, when they start talking about democracy in China, it's a very, very different idea. You know, for instance, these other parties, there are 8 other parties. These are very small. They range from 3,000 up to under 190,000. What they are composed of, though, is not just, you know, somebody who wants to join the Green Party or the Red Party. It's people who are associated with different areas of expertise, returning scholars, academics in different fields. They all are in basically different areas. Even minority groups and things like this will bring it. And they bring important voices, because you have 90 million plus or minus Communist Party members, and then you have these much smaller ones. So carving out a role for them to be vigilant in terms of how they're looking at all of these plans that are being brought to the point where they're going to become laws is very important. But it's a different system.
Small in size, these 8 democratic parties of the CPPCC are placed under absolute and unconditional leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. Therefore, we call the system the CPC-led multi-party cooperation. What do you think?
Well, first of all, the multi-party consultative democracy is very much of a Chinese phenomenon, and there is no such phenomenon anywhere else in the rest of the world. Secondly, this multi-party consultative system with the Communist Party of China as the leader is deeply entrenched. These 8 parties were all founded before 1949, and they all sided with the Communist Party of China in the final stages leading towards the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949. And ever since then, this structure of alliance, of teamwork, of unity, for example, has withstood the test of time across the decades. Now, I think the idea is to build up more consensus and to allow the 8 democratic parties the chance to participate in government. Many of the leading members of these 8 democratic parties are now ministers, for example, university presidents, etc. They hold important capacities in themselves. And however, the crucial point is that they are not there to strike out for another strategic direction for China. They are there to review the strategies the Communist Party of China has decided, to make recommendations for changes, and to come up with their own creative ideas, but eventually to move in the same direction with the leading party here to build up greater stability and prosperity for the nation.
Well, I'm afraid both lawmakers in the Western parliamentary politics or people's deputies of the National People's Congress in the PRC aim to build consensus, but through different approaches. For example, in the West, they do so. They get the job done through competitive democracy, through debates, policy discussions, and open, tough debates in the Congress. But in China, we get the job done through consultation or democratic consultative system. And therefore, the West would have good reasons to fear, well, you know, this is a rubber stamp. This is not real democracy. How do you look at the differences here between the two set of political institutions in the West and the East?
Well, the key there is consultative. I mean, it's just a very, very different cultural perspective on this. And from the Chinese perspective, it's very important because what they see is a lot of the bad stuff, the poisonous stuff, as I think Xi mentioned, saying that you know, there's this competitive democracy, this desire for power by pushing the opposite of whatever somebody else is trying to do is not good. What you do is you get cycles of leaders coming in and undoing what the last leaders have done, and it's not productive. You start losing a lot of the people become confused, and also you're not able to push your national agenda in a consistent way. For China, this is very important and has been the strength by which they have succeeded so far. The question is, as you go forward, how do these groups represent a growing middle class? It's going to be something that changes. And I think the government is trying to carve out areas where people can have a meaningful consultation. Even as power starts to accumulate at the top, they need to have a balanced system. So this is one of the things they're looking at.
Anna put his finger on an interesting point about representation. What do you think of the legitimacy of the representation for CPPCC? I know members of CPPCC are just called political advisors. They are not elected. They are not delivered through the competitive process.
Well, first of all, CPPCC as a political institution is also unheard of in any other country. It's very much of a Chinese tradition. Before 1949, CPPCC actually organized the establishment of the People's Republic of China in terms of formulation of the constitution, etc. Later, National People's Congress was established, and CPPCC became more or less of a consultative body. And among the membership, which runs up to about 3,000 members, about 60% are actually non-Communist Party members. Only 40% are Communist Party members, and many of them actually held very senior positions like ministers or governors before their retirement from the government. And whenever the CPPCC meets, they actually look at the same issues with very, very diversified and different perspectives. And this is the difference and the advantage of CPPCC. For party members, they normally will need to follow party disciplines, and then they more or less come up with the same view about one particular issue. For CPPCC members, because their background, different party affiliation, and different professional expertise, for example, they can check out and size up a particular situation from different perspectives, come up with different recommendations, and all with the desire to make the resolution or the documents or the decisions better and more scientifically based.
But I think you have to kind of look at how things are changing. That gives you a clue of where the future is. There are fewer people from the manufacturing, the billionaire class and things like that. This year they made sure that a quarter of them were women, that there was minority representation. In addition to ex-ministers, there are also people who work in very, very humble, taxi drivers, everything. So it's a very things. And they have not always been just a rubber stamp. They're kind of a sounding board for the top management, let us say. Now, when they introduced this idea of having a property tax a few years ago, there was a lot of grumbling. And at that point, it was withdrawn. It will be put in this year, but there have been changes to it. And there was this feeling that people have to get used to this, and that this idea was a little premature. So it does change. It's a sounding board, and as you pointed out, it's about consensus. If there's enough people who feel that something is not going the way they think it is, there'll be something said and the possibility of it being withdrawn.
There have been extensive media reports from the West and a lot of seminars, closed-door discussions about what the future of China might be like and what it means for the rest of the world. And the questions focus on what is happening in China politically. There's not as much margin for public opinions today. Governments at different levels are tightening grip on public opinions, and absolute loyalty is demanded to respect the core leadership of the Central Committee of the CPC, with Mr. Xi Jinping being the commanding control. With that being said, can we really have any responsible criticism or different voices? To answer these questions, let me give you a context about how power transfer was won, how power was won back in 1949. I visited Taipei, capital of Taiwan, and I was surprised to see that the people in the island were still reflecting upon why they lost the Civil War. One bitter lesson they came up with was there was some margin for opposition voices, for critical opposition voices, and that was a mistake from the perspective of the KMT, the then ruling party of the mainland. So with this broad context in your mind, and first of all, this is a sensitive issue, of course, and Western media have been following this very closely in mainland China. What do you think of the relationship between criticism and maintaining the legitimate authoritative authority?
Well, I think you need to draw a line. I mean, in China, if you go out and you express opposition views or views that have not been checked, and you start trying to gather people around you and organize meetings, you will be stopped. And this, they are cracking down on. Now, if you and I are talking about something, or we're exchanging on social media and talking about whatever we want, and saying, well, I don't agree with this or I agree with that, there are no consequences. So this idea that somehow the government is watching your every move and deciding whether you're using key words and you're a bad person and they're going to arrest you is fallacious. What happens here is the government feels that they're in a very sensitive time. It's beset with issues about getting to the next stage of tertiary violent eradicating. They have pollution problems, poverty problems, debt problems. They have a lot of things. And internationally, the rise of China very quickly has caused a lot of friction. And China has to deal with this. What it can't have is different voices talking, all right, and trying to tear it down and say, and creating uncertainty within the population or within the government itself. Now, this is one view, and I think this is the view that Beijing has taken. They've seen what is happening in Europe, in America, in many of the other democracies, even in Africa where they have democracies, and they're not impressed. They're saying they're not able to make the kind of progress we're making. These dissension voices confuse people. You have people who are always offering what sounds easy and nice. I'll put a chicken in every pot, but can it actually be done, and if so, can it be sustained?
The uniformity of public opinions is badly needed at this critical moment, a defining moment for China's sustainability of both the social progress and economic development. But that is being called into question by the Western media, saying, well, what do you mean by political consultation if you cannot allow for serious opposition voices to occur and to put the ruling party under the supervision?
Now, as a general point, let's look at China itself. I think for anyone, any political party, any political system, any kind of government try to do a good job in running China, to govern China, to provide all the goods and services for the people, to improve the living standards of the people. It's a challenge. It's a difficult job. I would say it's probably one of the most difficult jobs in the whole world. Secondly, I don't think any country has a monopoly on democracy or having a monopoly on governance, for example. Every country needs to come up with a solution which suits its own conditions and circumstances. In China, we don't claim that our system works for anywhere else in the world.
There's no such thing like a one-size-fits-all.
No,
there's no such thing.
We only say...
And the future is unknown.
Yes, the system that works for China works, and it does solve our problems, and it does allow the people to live in safety and see their living standards keep improving and the international standing gets better. And I think that's the crucial test.
Gentlemen, here is the discourse which was very popular in the immediate aftermath of the end of the Cold War. People like Francisco Fukuyama or Dr. Brzezinski declared, well, we beat communism, and they cited the combination of liberal democracy with the liberal market economy as the only reason to bring about the end of history. I mean, Francisco Fukuyama was the author.
He's been backing away from that statement ever since.
The pendulum was swinging back and forth. But the issue, look, gentlemen, is can we have a peaceful coexistence between central authorities and the market economy? In other words, do we necessarily have to have a liberal democracy to guarantee the success of a market economy?
Well, I think clearly the answer is yes, you can have them, and it's been reconciled. I'm going to disagree a little bit with my learned colleague here. I think right now, everything that China has done is fine, but with a very large growing middle class, and who are used to more choices in everything from cars to clothes. As the country becomes more urbanized, things will have to change. Everything adjusts, all right? And it's going to be a question of what are the Chinese people interested in. I think if you talk to most people in China, they're not interested in nuclear policy or things. They want to know what's going to happen in terms of schools or the roads being repaired, a lot of the day-to-day types of things. But there might be some interest in having more consultation, but it's not going to necessarily be the way it is in the United States, where it's a very bottom-up kind of elect your local mayor and dog catcher and things like this.
A 1996 paper by a British think tank, Wilton Park concluded that democracy mustn't be confused with capitalism. The former is a political ideology, while the latter an economic system. Let's move on to discuss another question. Socialism with Chinese characteristics has entered a new era. What does that mean? Well, socialism, do we have the same thing with Scandinavian countries?
Well, first of all, before Deng Xiaoping's rise back to power in 1978, China was seized up with internal debate as to whether socialism must be better than capitalism, etc. And
such
then
debates were raging ahead of the 1992 southern tour of Guangdong by Deng Xiaoping.
And then China by then was locked up in this big ideological box. And then we became very equal, but we were more or less equally poor. And I think Deng Xiaoping's great contribution to China and to mankind is that he came up with this breakthrough, that is, socialism does not mean poverty. If socialism results in poverty, it means this is not a good ideology. But he believes that socialism can lead to wealth, can improve living standards of the people, and then socialism need to be flexible. Socialism need to absorb and incorporate whatever that works. That's the essence of socialism with Chinese characteristics. Literally, you can even say, for example, socialist market economy. Socialism and market economy seem to be opposed with each other. But Deng Xiaoping could make a major breakthrough and compromise so that socialism and market economy can work together.
It's a contradiction. Only if you believe that they cannot coexist.
You're right.
Yes. Here is a contradiction. This year marks the 200th anniversary of Karl Marx, and we're going to travel to Turin, the hometown of Karl, to pay tribute and to do a joint project with the local German television. Well, Karl Marx was vehemently critical of capitalism. Today, look at the impact of globalization. Capitals are sweeping across the whole world, with China adopting market economy with Chinese characteristics. These market forces are playing decisive forces in allocating and reallocating resources. And any debates about relationship between the government and the market would deserve a lot of media attention. So having said this, how do we look at Karl Marx, I mean, in the context of a definition for socialism?
But he, first off, he wasn't opposed to capitalism. He was opposed to a system which basically put the means and methods and wealth into the hands of a few people and basically treated the rest like serfs. And he saw this as unsustainable and inhumane. So I think you have to make a decision.
You were a translator for late leader Deng Xiaoping. Can you do me a favor and do this translation?
Yes.
Karl Marx said, quote, 资本来到世间，每一个毛细血口都渗透着血跟肮脏的东西。
I think Karl Marx's greatest contribution may actually cause the adding of a human face to capitalism. Why? Because his strong condemnation of those special characteristics of capitalism at his time were actually very accurate. And I think later development of Western countries seem to have turned on more and more of a human face. If we look at Nordic countries, for example, their system definitely is still capitalist in nature, but it's very much socialistic in welfare provision, for example, taking care of the elderly, striking out for gender equality, etc. Many of these features actually did not exist in the raw form of capitalism that Karl Marx actually got to know, and I think eventually Deng Xiaoping will turn out to be the better politician or statesman, because eventually I think it is the socialism with Chinese characteristics which will be more important, because these characteristics need to be flexible.
I'm going to disagree with that.
The controversial issue, I'm afraid, is income disparity. Look at in which countries income disparity is less than the other groups. For example, in Scandinavian countries, where you have the real practice of socialism, the income disparity is far less than the one we have in China. But that doesn't mean President Xi Jinping's political will be underestimated to undertake a drastic poverty alleviation campaign. Not a single one will be left behind in this presidency.
I think you're putting too much emphasis purely on money. And it's not. I mean, societies move forward together. Yes, income equality is important, but so is the social network, so is education, so is opportunity. All right, it's not just a distribution of money. If that were the case, we wouldn't have needed Deng Xiaoping. But I think Deng's solutions at that time have given birth to new issues that Xi and future generations of leaders are going to have to address. And particularly this idea is, how do you glue society together? To be pragmatic, all right, is great to talk about white cat, black cats, crossing the rivers. But how do you move a country together? What binds them other than nationalism? And I think they are trying to find ways to do that. And part of this is with this consultative. How do you bring in the voices constructively?
Well, we have 8 democratic parties within the CPPCC, the top political advisory body. One of them is called the Revolutionary Committee of the Chinese Kuomintang, or KMT. The other, which has something to do with Taiwan, is called the Taiwan Democratic Self-Government League. Today, if you look at the online debates, many argue that reunification with Taiwan is just a matter of time, whether a peaceful solution or by the use of force. That's just a technical matter. What's important, what matters really for this generation of the leadership and Mr. Xi Jinping is this issue is non-negotiable. Future of Taiwan, it has to be a reunification. What do you think of the role that these two parties play in bringing about the reunification?
Let me talk about the KMT Revolutionary Committee to start with. Back in 1948, when the civil war in China really was almost peaking, a group of very senior leaders of the KMT broke out of the KMT, which was the ruling party at that time, led by the Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek. And these people who broke away from KMT believed that Chiang Kai-shek actually betrayed the fundamental beliefs of the founding father of the Republic of China, Dr. Sun Yat-sen. And they actually did not want to continue the civil war with the communists. They want to have peace and unification and reconciliation for China. So they broke off and they set up this Revolutionary Committee for KMT, and they choose to side with the Communist Party of China in the final years of the civil war, and then throughout the years and decades after 1949. They actually have an important mission, that is to promote reunification of the motherland, promoting greater reconciliation between mainland and Taiwan.
People argue that the problem of Taiwan is the gradual process of disintegration of the KMT in itself. From day one of Li Tenghui, former leader of Taiwan, taking office, he won the trust of Chiang Jing-kuo, son of Chiang Kai-shek, for a very ridiculous reason. What are thoughts?
No, I'm just saying this idea about having these parties which are named after, whether or not you're for or against reunification is silly. I mean, the people who were around in 1948 are now all passed away. If they're still alive, it's amazing. So I don't know that that is necessarily a party. I would say the stronger examples of what are there are the groups like the returning Chinese students and scholars, the groups that are associated with culture, with science, and all of these areas. I think they are academics. They're people who can add some value to this. I don't necessarily know that the reunification is already within the blood of China. It's not something that you see as negotiable. I don't know what this party is going to actually add to that particular debate.
How many overseas Chinese or people of Chinese ethnicity live outside China?
Well, the numbers vary a great deal. I think one indication seems to be there are about 50 million people.
50 million people.
Of Chinese ethnicity.
One job of CPPCC is to get united with these guys and let them know that China is rising with the global impact. What can they do to contribute to China's process of modernization? Are you clearly aware of this?
Of course. I think for any big country or small country, their overseas diaspora is always important. And for China in particular, we have so many people of Chinese ethnicity living abroad, and getting them to know China better, to work together with China is always important.
Thank you so much. With that, we come to the end of this edition of Voices and Votes, our special program on the Liang Hui. I'll see you next time, the same time tomorrow evening. Until then, goodbye.